Hey there, fellow cartoon lovers. Welcome to Retro Dive, the place where we dive deep into the forgotten and underappreciated cartoons of the past. Now, today we're diving into the chaos of Ed, Edd and Eddy. Of course, not an underrated show, but definitely a cartoon that deserves more love, even though its world was as weird as the Eds themselves. Ed, Edd and Eddy were the trio that brought chaos to the screen. Whether it was Ed's unpredictable behaviour, Double D's neurotic tendencies, or Eddy's endless attempts to scam the neighbourhood kids, it was always a mess in the best way possible. And let's not forget the world they lived in. A neighbourhood where kids acted like adults and adults acted like nothing happened. No matter the chaos, the Eds never stopped scheming. But why did this show leave such an impact? Today, we're going deep into Ed, Edd and Eddy to explore why it stands out as one of the most memorable and hilarious cartoons from the early 2000s. Let's get into it. Back in the late 90s, cartoons were either super wacky or super weird. But what if I told you there was a show that took both to the next level? Enter Ed, Edd and Eddy, one of the most chaotic, ridiculous, yet brilliantly crafted cartoons ever made. The mastermind behind this chaos? Danny Antonucci. This guy was originally making violent adult cartoons. Yes, seriously. But one day he said, what if I made something for kids? And somehow he convinced Cartoon Network to say yes. I can only imagine that boardroom meeting. Unlike most cartoons at the time, Ed, Edd and Eddy had this wild, hand-drawn animation style. No clean digital lines, no smooth CGI, just raw, wobbly, why does everything look like it's melting vibes? But that's what made it so unique. Fun fact, the entire show is based on Danny Antonucci's real childhood. Yep, growing up in the suburbs, scamming kids, chasing jawbreakers, it was all inspired by real life. Which raises some serious questions about Danny's childhood. Alright, let's talk about the biggest idiots on Cartoon Network, Ed, Edd and Eddy. On the surface, they look like your standard trio, the dumb strong guy, the smart nerd and the short loud one. But here's the thing, every single one of them is an absolute menace in their own way. Ed, he's got the IQ of a potato but the strength of the Hulk. Double D, looks innocent but is basically the cul-de-sac secret mad scientist. And Eddy, this dude is basically Cartoon Network's version of Mr. Krabs, except way more desperate.
Buttered toast!
First up, Ed. This guy is basically a golden retriever in human form. He's got the attention span of a goldfish, the hygiene of a raccoon, and yet somehow, he's the most powerful being in the entire cul-de-sac. Seriously, Ed has taken direct hits from cars, punched through walls, and carried his two best friends like they weigh nothing. If he ever figured out how strong he really was, the entire show would be over. Now, Double D might look like the nerdy responsible one, but let's be honest, he's the real evil genius of the group. He's built machines, inventions, entire roller coasters, and somehow still hasn't left the cul-de-sac. And the biggest mystery of all, what's under his hat? Some people think it's a brain the size of a planet, others say it's just more hair. But let's be real, the show never answered it, and now we just have to live with the mystery. And then there's Eddy, the walk-in definition of get rich quick. This dude spends every waking moment trying to scam his friends for a couple of quarters, just so he can buy jawbreakers bigger than his head. The problem? He is literally the worst scammer of all time. His plans never work, he always gets caught, and somehow, he never gives up. Honestly, respect.
Dorks!
So, the Eds are already weird enough, but somehow they are still the most normal people in this cul-de-sac. Every single kid in this neighbourhood feels like they were dropped on their head as a baby, multiple times. You've got a kid obsessed with bikes, a guy with a plank of wood as his best friend, and an actual warlord in training. Seriously, what is this place?
Urchins of processed cheese bread!
First up, Rolf. He's the only kid who actually has a job, owns an entire farm, and casually says stuff like, do not bite Rolf's belt of discipline. Bro, what? This guy is built different. He's basically a mix between an old school warrior and your weird uncle who tells stories that make zero sense. Oh, and did I mention he once folded Ed like a lawn chair? Yeah, don't mess with Rolf. Next up, Johnny and Plank. Look, every kid had an imaginary friend at some point, but Johnny? He just never grew out of it. This dude carries a wooden board around like it's his son, talks to it like it talks back, and let's be honest, Plank is running the show here. I don't know what's scarier, the fact that Johnny thinks he's real, or the fact that sometimes it actually seems like he is. And then there's Kevin. This guy is every middle school bully ever, but his entire personality revolves around one thing, his bike. He shows up out of nowhere, calls the Ed dorks for literally existing, then rides away like he just won a race. Bro, are you in a gang or something? Why is your bike your whole personality? And finally, the real villains of this show, the Kanker sisters. These three were obsessed with the Eds, and honestly, it was kinda terrifying. They chased them, trapped them, forced them into weird weddings. Cartoon Network really let this slide, huh? Let's be real, the Eds didn't deserve most of what happened to them, but this was straight up nightmare fuel. You want to know what pure chaos looks like? Imagine you finally get your hands on a giant jawbreaker, and then poof, it's gone. This episode had the Eds freaking out like it was the end of the world, and honestly, I get it. These guys live and breathe for jawbreakers, so watching them spiral into madness over losing them, pure gold. We already know Ed is built like a tank, but in this episode, he straight up became a movie monster. This guy lifted an entire house, ran through fences like they were paper, and had every kid in the cul-de-sac running for their lives. Ed was unstoppable, and honestly, if I were there, I'd be out too. Getting stuck in school overnight is actual nightmare fuel, and somehow, this episode made it 10 times worse. The Eds were trapped, the school felt like a haunted house, and at one point, Eddy tried to eat his desk. I mean, same bro, desperate times. And that, my friends, is why Ed, Edd and Eddy will always be one of the wildest, funniest cartoons of all time. If you grew up on this show, you already know, nothing else even comes close. What other forgotten cartoons should we dive into next? Drop a comment below. Oh, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the shows that made our childhoods legendary. See you next time!